to another episode of Inspired Voices. My name is Riera, and this is Jaimie Lee.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Appreciate you being here.
It's a pleasure.
Why don't you tell everybody what you do?
So I am a Krav Maga instructor and a Krav Maga studio gym owner.
All right. Nice. Yeah, we met through mutual friends.
Yes.
And I checked out your stuff. I like what you're doing.
Thank you.
Because it's not just Krav Maga, right? You kind of do some... Is there like stunt things going on in there?
Oh, well, so I guess you kind of say that. We love to do a little bit of social media and videos and stuff like that, and that's kind of how I connected with our mutual friend because, of course, with promotion, we like to share what we do, and we've done demonstrations and things of that nature. It's kind of a martial art that's more for demonstration because it can be quite dangerous if we tried to do it as a competition type of thing. So we have actually had the opportunity to work with different filmmakers and perform what we do just to share it with more people.
Yeah, I think that kind of thing is fun too.
Yeah. Oh yeah, so much fun.
It kind of changes things up too.
Yes,
right?
yes, adds variety.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we just start from the top? Where are you from?
I am from Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Oh, a native.
Yes, I am a native. It's so funny because so many people are not from Chapel Hill, so people are like, oh, they make y'all? It's like, yes, there are native people from Chapel Hill.
Yeah, and then it looks like you stayed there pretty much your whole life, huh?
Kind of, sort of. I left to go to college in Atlanta, so I went to Emory in Atlanta, and then I lived overseas a little bit after that.
Okay, gotcha.
I returned home, and I've been home ever since.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah. All right, so let's take it back a little bit. So how was it growing up in Chapel Hill?
I thought it was awesome.
Yeah. I feel like was there things here in Chapel Hill?
Yeah, there was stuff going on here.
Okay.
It was great. I grew up a Tar Heel. Sorry for all Duke and State fans, but I grew up a Tar Heel, and my mother actually worked for the Carolina basketball program, so I got a chance to kind of grow up with a bunch of athletes and that world.
Yeah.
And my grandfather worked at both Duke University and UNC, so I kind of got a chance to experience growing up in Chapel Hill, but also experience, how influential the universities are on the area. So I kind of got the best of both worlds, even though I didn't actually attend UNC.
Right. Oh, okay, gotcha. Yeah, I feel like that's a big influence when your parents work at a college.
Absolutely.
I guess you could say.
Absolutely.
It's like it's almost you get an insight into what's to come.
Yes,
something like that.
Absolutely.
So she said you said she was a head basketball coach?
She actually worked for the men's UNC basketball program.
Okay.
During Coach Dean Smith's era, so we got a chance to it's just a very exciting world, the world of UNC basketball and the rivalries and all that kind of stuff. So I attended a lot of games, and a lot of them were like my big brothers growing up. Even back in the Michael Jordan days, and a lot of those guys who went on to be professionals, we got a chance to get to know them when they were undergrads. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, cool. It was a really cool experience.
Did you get into the games for free and stuff like that?
Oh yeah, she was right there in the office, the front office. So yeah, it was kind of like my summer camp, and everything was at the Smith Center at the Dean Dome. So that was kind of like my second home for a long time.
Gotcha. So with that kind of influence, did you play sports yourself and stuff like that?
I did, but I found I had more of a knack for dance. I got more into, I played piano and I did ballet, tap, and jazz performance. And so that was like my first love. I wanted to be a ballerina. And that's why I share that a lot with my clients now, because it's like, you never know how you might discover Krav, because part of me, I definitely started in a totally different arena. But that was my first love, was actually ballet.
Yeah, I mean, to go a little bit more in depth on that, is like it helps with the balance, right?
Absolutely.
With martial arts and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Like dancers, anybody who can connect the mind with the body is a better transition or easier transition into martial arts. And stuff
Absolutely, definitely helped. With where I am now with self-defense and martial arts.
That's cool. That's cool. What kind of? So you said tap. What kind of dances was it?
So ballet, tap, jazz, and point. Okay. So like dancing the tippy toes.
Which one was your favorite?
I would say point was probably my favorite.
Okay. Wow. Really?
The most painful, but definitely my favorite. I loved it, and I was I was best at jazz dance performance, but my favorite thing to do was actually point.
Gotcha. And you did that for how many years?
Gosh, I started, I think when I was 5 or 6, and I did it all through high school. And then by the time I got into high school, I started so many other activities. I was actually, not only was I dancing, but I was a bouncing bulldog, so I actually used to do competitive rope skipping and performance shows, and I also played basketball, and I just wanted to do a little bit of everything. I did piano performance, I had a gospel choir, and so I was pretty jam-packed all the way through high school. And then I did, I had a dance show at Emory University, so I kind of continued a little bit more of it in an informal way, but I still maintained dance and music while I was there.
Right, that's cool. Did you have like a goal in mind with that?
I really just did it for fun.
Oh, really?
It was just my happy place.
Gotcha.
I went to Emory thinking I would get more into like international business affairs because I also love foreign language and I love to travel. So that was where I thought I would be going professionally. You know, luckily I had the opportunity to try a lot of different things, but I ended up sticking with music as a minor, and then I studied French and foreign language so that I could use that skill to then travel, because I just found myself not quite as interested in business and international business affairs.
Yeah, I get that. So that's interesting. So what happened if you didn't have a goal in mind, you just did it for fun? Obviously, trying new things, I feel like is the best way to kind of find out what you want to do, right?
Yes, absolutely. Because I didn't quite grow up thinking, okay, this is definitely what I'm going to do.
Right.
So instead, I was like, well, let me try, you know, while I'm young and I have the opportunity to do so, let me try a little bit of everything.
So you were conscious of that?
Yes.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I just knew that I wanted to travel, and I knew I loved people and foreign language. So I was like, okay, if I just focus on my language skills, that should be able to translate into whether I decide to do, you know, something that's more of a business route, or I was thinking about possibly going to law school, you know, business school, who knows? So I was just like, let me just stick with something I enjoy so that I could maintain some other, you know, extracurricular activities.
Right. And it looks good for college, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So what happened after high school?
So I attended Emory in Atlanta because my family is really, a lot of my family is from Atlanta. So Atlanta was kind of like a second home.
So it's like an easy transition for you?
Yes. Gotcha. Instead of staying and going to UNC, I was like, well, this is probably the best time for me to travel and live somewhere else. So that's why I decided to go to Emory. And then I actually had the opportunity. I worked in a law firm shortly after that because I was, you know, thinking about law school. I worked as a paralegal in Midtown Atlanta. And then I found the opportunity to teach English overseas, and I was like, oh, I got to do that. So
how'd you find that?
Just one of my professors. I'm a people person. Shocker, I love to talk. So one of the professors I got to know pretty well, she told me about a program where you literally can go to almost any country to teach English. And one thing about, and of course I studied French, so I wanted to go to France. And so I moved to France and taught English at a middle school and a high school.
Wow.
And so
you were like, what, 22,
23, somewhere around there. And it was interesting because it wasn't like so structured. You basically had to get your own ticket to fly there. You had to find your own housing. You had to apply for your own worker's visa, all of that, know, as a citizen. And it's not like I was doing that in English. Luckily I was proficient enough in French that I kind of figured it out. And I also had an exchange student who lived with my family, and her family's from Paris, but also via Cameroon. So she was like, oh yeah, if you go there, I'll make sure my family, you know, looks out for you if you need anything. So they were living in Paris, so I got to hang out in Paris quite a bit, but I was working in Nantes, France, and living in Montaigu. So it was a little tiny town called Montaigu, and then I would travel, and you know, it was just so much fun. It was a lot of work, but it was so much fun.
Right. So you stayed with her family?
I didn't, because they were a few hours away from where I ended up working, so I could visit them. And then if I, you know, had any questions about, you know, documents and things I had to do, I had to get a bank account and, you know, make sure that everything was set up to get paid, and, you know, my living arrangements. So they were there to help me with that. So I was still pretty young and had never done that before. So
was that your first time out of the country?
It wasn't my first time traveling out of the country. Definitely my first time living outside of the country. But I'd visited France before. And when I was in undergrad, I was a part of a Mellon Foundation. So I got a scholarship where I was able to travel to West Africa, South Africa, French West Indies. So I got, I mean, I knew I wanted to travel, and I made sure that happened while I had the chance.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Thanks.
Seems like you took very good advantage of it too.
Yes, and I tell undergrads all the time, I'm like, if you can do it, go ahead and take advantage of it, because you know, a lot of times you, as a student, you don't have to spend any money to do so, because you know, there's part of, you know, higher education, they really encourage stuff like that. So, you know, just by getting to know my professors and them telling me about these programs, I applied, and I was like, I have nothing to lose by applying, and I was able to, you know, I got accepted, and they were looking for student assistants, so I got to travel with professors, and that was another career path I thought about. I was thinking about pursuing a PhD. And I did an honors thesis and the whole bit, and I just realized, like, I just love interaction with people a little bit more than kind of, you know, sitting in research. So it exposed me to it. It helped me kind of, you know, through the process of elimination. I knew that, okay, the traveling part I loved, that part I didn't love as much, but I'm very thankful that I had that experience.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it kind of broadens your self-awareness, honestly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But like that kind of thing also is like, I don't know. I hear two things. It's like either scary to go out of the country and live out there, or it's, oh, it wasn't that bad because I was young and like I was just kind of focused.
Pretty much. Now looking back, I'm like, I tell my mom all the time, I commend you for like dealing with that, because at that age, I didn't think twice of it. I'm like, of course I'll travel and I'll see what it's like out there. I didn't think about that. That's part of what led me to Krav Maga, because I traveled with really no fears, no inhibitions. I just thought, okay, this is a fun thing to explore, and I just did it. And you know, the more I traveled and the more I was exposed to, you know, just realizing that traveling by yourself, you know, there is some risk. I was very fortunate. I never had any major issues, but it definitely, you know, heightened my awareness as I got older. I'm like, you know, I should at least be able to, I should heighten my situational awareness at the very least.
I mean, it's kind of amazing how many people don't.
Right. Absolutely.
It's like, I see this, like one person, like we're both walking down the sidewalk, they're kind of far away and they're just looking straight ahead, you know, walking. But I'm looking at them the whole time, and not once did they look back. I'm like, damn. Like if it was me, I would at least like glance back.
Right. Absolutely. Just the little things. And having traveled, part of my role as a student assistant was to help professors navigate in other countries. And one thing I noticed is, again, this is definitely not to take away from their brilliance and their intelligence, but when you're focused on an objective, which was the research and what they were, you know, the meetings and everything, they needed someone to pay attention more to the logistics of traveling. And that's what really started to open my eyes, because I was like, okay, when you're you know, airports are very different, and the way you go through security can vary, and also, you know, there's challenges with panhandling and making sure that you're aware of your belongings and keeping up with things and keeping up with your passports and having, you know, backup plans in case you lose those things. You know, it's like when you're traveling for work purposes, sometimes you're relying on, you know, staff and other people to make sure those things go smoothly.
Right.
Whereas the more I did it, the more I realized you really have to take autonomy and make sure for yourself that you're protecting yourself and not just always rely on the people who coordinate those things.
Right.
And for me, I like to travel not so much as a tourist. Whenever I travel, I like to be as immersed as possible in culture, and I like to get to know people who live there, and what do you eat, and what you know, how is the school system, and what is life like in general. And so I don't like to just visit a place and have the same experience I have in the States. So because I wanted to immerse myself among native people, and usually people are so gracious and they invite you into their homes, and you really get, you know, people are so hospitable from my experience in traveling overseas. And so it was really nice to have that experience when I had, you know, more freedom to do so.
Right.
Anyway, I can go on and on about
that. No, you're fine. Yeah, you're good. I think that's great. And you said you did that to help professors and stuff like that?
Yeah,
Professor's assistant?
part of the I was a
Right.
teacher's assistant or professor's assistant.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, that in itself is like
Super cool. It was super cool. And I mean, these were all, published authors from around the world and professors at major universities, and they just came together as a collective and would, there was the coordinators at that time were just trying to foster more interest in undergraduates pursuing PhDs.
right.
And so the experience as a scholarship Mellon Fellow was to get to know other fellows, but they selected certain ones of us to travel with the professors and expand our idea of what we could do if we did pursue a PhD in whatever field of study. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, the program. So it's like you apply to become a fellow, and then you apply to be an assistant.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, I definitely got to do that, because I always expressed that I really wanted to travel. So.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I know you said that you never really had any issues overseas and stuff like that, but like, really, never any issues?
No, but also, I spoke to people enough that I heard some of the stories of some things that would happen to others. One in particular, when I went to Ghana, there was a student who unfortunately had passed away, but it wasn't so much that he had put himself in a dangerous situation. It was just he was so relaxed, kind of as in his travels, that he was consuming food, and they warn you about in certain areas if you're not used to the water, and there's different bacteria and different when you're dealing with malaria and all, you get your shots in advance, but it wasn't clear if he had done those things, and he really immersed himself in the area, in the town, so he was kind of out hanging out, and he just didn't get the care that he needed right away. So I was educated of situations like that.
Right.
So I was careful enough to try to make sure I had covered those precautions.
Gotcha.
And they were great about making sure that people on site, looked out for you. So if I needed to run errands, I was always accompanied with someone.
Oh, that's good.
It was extremely, professional and well coordinated.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like traveling in general, especially for POC, right? So like that in itself is kind of like another level of need to be aware of things and stuff like that, right?
Yeah. Yes. And so I had some interesting experiences with that. When I was in France, it was like right after Hurricane Katrina, and so there was definitely a lot of interest as like, what the heck did y'all do there? I was getting challenged a lot, like, why did you guys leave your people like that? So and so I became more of an American. And I became more aware of being an American and what that means in other parts of the world. And at that time, that was at the forefront of international news. Was, and I wasn't, those conversations weren't so much like, were you appalled at the treatment of people who look like you? It was like, I was an American. I was a participant in neglecting other Americans.
Right.
If that makes sense. So at the time, here in the States, it definitely heightened some, discussion of racial tension that still existed in the United States. And overseas, it was more so of like, you as Americans, how could you do that? So it's very interesting how traveling overseas made me feel a little bit more defensive of myself as an American and wanting to feel like, yes, we have our challenges, like every nation has its challenges.
Sure.
And I certainly don't ignore that and don't deny that. My family, my grandfather moved to Chapel Hill because he actually ran for office in '69, and he was the first Black mayor elected in a southern town since Reconstruction. So I was very much immersed into and grew up learning about the civil rights movement and my family's participation in the movement because they were right there in the thick of it.
Yeah.
And my family did have to deal with crosses burning in the yards and things of that nature. So it's not like I wasn't acutely aware of the challenges that we faced as a nation. But when I traveled overseas, in a way, it made me feel a little bit more protective about, how far we have come. And I'm like, yes, we still have a ways to go. But I felt a little bit more proud of who I am in general, because I can't help where I was born, and I'm still proud of where I come from. and open to other cultures. And so it kind of, at that time, it made me a little bit, I was surprisingly like a little bit more defensive, like, you know, I know it's, but hold on now, it's not all of us. I would not have, you know, of course, not all of us sat back and watched, you know, our fellow citizens suffer.
It's not like you have control of the whole situation.
Exactly. That's my point. Absolutely. And then, but you also become appreciative when you travel to developing countries and you see, you know, you're right there in the thick of seeing what happens when there is not an infrastructure in place of opportunity in the first place.
You
know, when I traveled to Cape Town, you know, the first thing you see when you leave the airport is you pass by the shanty towns, and you know, when you are seeing impoverished areas, it makes you again more appreciative of coming from a place where there's more opportunity. Even if you know, are born into a very challenging situation, there is some mobility that can happen economically for many people, whereas in some nations that opportunity just doesn't even exist. You know?
So, that's true.
So in a way, in many ways, it made me a lot more appreciative of the positives, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And like with your dad being in government and stuff like that, did he kind of teach you at a very young age about certain things and stuff like that?
Yeah, so my grandparents they're awesome. He actually is still very much involved in the community to this day. But my grandfather, Howard Lee, he didn't, in a way there's similarities. He didn't really plan on a career in politics.
Oh, okay.
But, you know, he was a pursuer of opportunities, and our family believes very strongly in education. And he's like, if I pursue it, even though he was born of a sharecropper, and you know, he grew up in Lithonia, Georgia. My grandmother grew up in West Savannah, Georgia, and you know, it was definitely a struggle. My grandma had 10 brothers and sisters, you know, and they all had to, you know, make do, and every one of them was able to pursue higher education, and that's pretty cool to come from that legacy. Both my grandparents, their siblings, they all had a chance to go to colleges and universities. And so absolutely. They instilled those values. It's like if you know, pursue education, you work hard, you'd be surprised at what you can do, despite whatever challenges.
Right.
And so, my grandparents did a good job instilling that to my mom and her siblings, and then to us, grandkids, and now great-grandkids. So we hope to continue that legacy for sure. But I at least grew up learning learning that I needed to appreciate what they went through in order for me to have the opportunities that I have. You know, even just being a small business owner and being able to pursue, you know, so many different things in my life, and I could afford to be indecisive, whereas, you know, they had to know, you know, pretty early on what direction they were going to take. And so, you know, when he ended up, you know, having the opportunity to run for office, and then was elected in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, which was crazy at the time, to elect a black mayor. And so, but he was able to, you know, navigate some pretty tough times, and you know, even his legacy still continues. I mean, he still does the work. My grandmother was an educator for decades, and the bus system, which is a free bus system in Chapel Hill, that's thanks to my granddad. So he fought for that and implemented that in Chapel Hill. So there's you know, he's awesome. They're awesome. But you know, but they definitely,
you got a good family tree there.
Very, very lucky, very fortunate, and I admire them to no end. And that's actually how I know Liz, because her family also was friends, part of all of that, part of his history in Chapel Hill. So
gotcha.
that's really cool. So
that's cool.
But not to ramble, but I hope I answered your question.
So like, so in your early 20s, you traveled a lot, right?
Yes.
And then doing the same profession, right?
So,
it was teaching English, and then it was...
Yeah, so when I got back from France, I decided, that's when I was like, okay, I got to figure something out. So I was deciding on whether to go to grad school or law school or you know, so I ended up tutoring
Hold on, before you get into that,
yes.
But when you had the thought of, okay, I got to figure something out,
yes.
Was it like overwhelming? Was it like
yes.
anxiety kicking
yes.
in?
That's me all day because I like so many different
saw it in
things.
your face.
Yeah. I was just like, oh, it was rough, and I'm open and honest about that because I still work with a lot of young people, and I know how daunting that can be. It's like if you don't know, it's okay to not know.
Right.
And that was something that I was stressed about that at the time,
Sure.
but I also appreciated that I could take time to figure it out because when I lived in France, one thing about the students I worked with, they're like, we have to know before high school what we want to pursue professionally.
In France?
Mm-hmm. And especially at that time. I don't know if things have changed since then. This was, early 2000s, but they were like, no, by the time you go to college, by the time you go to what is equivalent to high school, they kind of have to be on track to what they want to do professionally.
Wow.
There's not a lot of that flexibility.
Oh, wow.
It's more specialized.
Interesting.
And so I actually was teaching at a high school for artists. So most of the kids, they weren't super interested in English, but they were very proficient. It wasn't like a challenge to them, but they were extraordinarily artistic and just brilliant. And it was amazing to see how young they were, but the type of work they were doing at that time. Like, I can't even describe it, like textiles and all kinds of stuff. Like, it was so creative. They had artwork everywhere. And I remember that some of the students, as a gift, they made me this jewelry by hand on my last day there, and I still have it to this day because it was just amazing. But yeah, that's what they described to me. They were like, yeah, we really have to know early on. And now here I am, a graduate. I got a BA, and I'm just like, yeah, I still don't quite know. So I worked at a law firm before I taught English overseas.
Yeah.
When I worked at a law firm, I realized I didn't want to be an attorney, just because it phenomenal, brilliant people.
It's a lot of work.
But a lot of work. Yeah, I remember the law firm was open 24 hours a day.
Damn.
Because attorneys were working there 24 hours a day. Some of the clients were like Coca-Cola
Sure.
and Marta.
Okay.
So these were major clients. And I was a marketing assistant, so I wasn't even totally in the thick of their work. But even the marketing department, the pressure that they're under 24 hours a day. And again, like every hour on the hour, there's somebody in there working.
Damn.
And I just realized I wanted to have a little bit more fun.
Right.
And so that's that. Again, it was kind of process of elimination for me because I saw like, okay, I could do this, but do I really want to? And again, that's a luxury. I don't take that for granted. I thought that was quite a luxury to have time to kind of figure it out.
Yeah.
But yes, as an unfortunate consequence is the anxiety of like, oh, I gotta make a decision. So I ended up tutoring in the athletic program.
Okay.
So I was tutoring student athletes at UNC.
Okay.
And after several months, then I was like, okay, there's an opportunity in academic advising for student athletes. And very energetic, very fun atmosphere. And I actually started working with football. So I was in charge of academic progress and stuff for football players at UNC. So that was it brought me a little bit more to my roots because I grew up in basketball, but I was in football this time. So
right, yeah.
I kind of I was there, but not in the same area as my mom was. By that time, she had retired. But I was tutoring, and then I became a full-time academic advisor. And so I was in that field for almost a decade. And it was a lot of fun, but we had some challenges for sure. But yeah, that just took me to another side of the world of athletics. It kind of combined my academic background with the energy of working with young people who could, have the potential to become multimillionaires, which is just a really fun atmosphere. And also just a lot of talent, it was a lot of fun. But at the same time, still, very long hours, still very challenging. They have a lot on their plate to be a full-time student and an athlete in Division I. It's a lot. Yeah. And, there was stuff. There was, just like with anything, there was stuff.
Right.
And,
so what did you decide on what to do like after that?
So there was a period of time where the NCAA was kind of like investigating and all sorts of drama was going on. And I needed an outlet because it was very, very stressful. And I got on Groupon and Living Social. That was kind of new at the time. And I discovered Krav Maga. And I was like, I was thinking about getting back into dance. So I did a couple Groupons with dance and different things. Yoga, I was like thinking about doing that. I enjoyed all those things. But I took my first Krav Maga class and I was absolutely hooked. I remember my coworkers were like, "You're interested in self-defense?" And I was like, "Yeah, I actually took karate for a little bit in high school because, again, I did some of everything."
Yeah.
And after having traveled and in hindsight, thinking about all the places I went by myself, and even just hanging out with other students who were overseas teaching English, because there were hundreds of us at the time from all over the world who were there to teach either, if our native tongue was English, we were teaching English. There were people from Spanish-speaking countries who were teaching Spanish. And so it was a program that brought people from all over the world, and we would hang out together.
That's
so,
cool.
We were young and kind of carefree, but again, looking back, I'm like, thank goodness.
Could you guys understand each other?
Oh yeah,
Okay.
I found most of them spoke English.
Okay, gotcha.
One of the biggest challenges was to actually practice our French because so many of us would speak English. But it was so much fun because I had German friends who would try to teach us German, and we would try to teach each other, and Spanish speakers who were trying to teach us a little bit of Spanish. So we did pick up here and there. But for the most part, people understood English in terms of those of us who were there to teach English. The small town I lived in, most native people did not, but I always had someone I could call and be like, "How did you figure this out? How did you who spoke English?" So it helped. It definitely helped. But the immersion definitely gave me the opportunity to improve my French skills. By the time I came back home, I was pretty proficient.
I mean, French people in general, I hear, are sticklers. Sticklers for people who try to speak French.
Yes,
right?
yes. Oh, they will correct you in a heartbeat. But I appreciated that because I was there to learn, and so. But everybody was so friendly. I mean, everybody was so open. I was always being invited to someone's home for food and for fellowship. And I remember my first Christmas there. We were eating escargot, it was so different, but it was so cool at the same time. The snails and stuff moving on the plate, and but I was always open to stuff like that. I love.
Really? So you tried it and everything?
Oh yeah, I had no issue at the time eating whatever and trying different things. That was my favorite thing to do, was again to immerse myself. And luckily I have a pretty iron stomach, so I never had an issue trying exotic foods, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
But almost anything is delicious in garlic and butter, I tell you.
That's true. That's true.
But yeah, no, it was a really fun time.
That's cool. So you got into Krav Maga, right?
Yes. So once I was several years into academic advising, found a Groupon, ended up taking my first Krav Maga class. After that first class,
it's like you went on a Groupon binge.
Yes, I did because I needed an outlet because. Working in a program like that, it's 24/7. I mean, we had, we're working during the day, meeting with all of our student athletes, at night running study hall at the time, weekends, there are games and travel, and I work with different teams. Excuse me. So I definitely needed a stress reliever.
Yeah.
And I've always been active. Like I've always done some type of sport or some type of dance or something like that. So I was like, let me try something. Let me go back to self-defense, because I did a little bit of karate in high school, but I didn't get really into it. I didn't take it for more than a year. So I was like, okay, I'm an adult, but at the same time, this is an adult-focused self-defense system. I'm not necessarily, in class with 12-year-olds, which is, in other traditional martial arts, when you're going through the belt process, you might be training alongside people a lot younger. And so I like that it was adult focused, and I like that it was really real world scenario focused. So yeah, after my first class, I was hooked. I was pretty much there like every day.
Interesting.
And then it's designed to be a quick learn. So if you pick up the techniques, it does have a belt system. So if you pick up the techniques quickly enough, you can level up.
Yeah.
And then once you start to level up, you can actually train to be able to teach other people.
Yeah.
So within the first year,
the first year.
Within the first year, I was already training to be an instructor.
Oh wow, yeah. That's kind of like. It's kind of like what I did too with MMA.
Yeah,
I tried it one time. I was like hooked.
Yes.
Every single day, almost.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yep. Absolutely. That's how it gets.
And then eventually, I was a TA.
Awesome.
And like, teaching classes while he was gone. And stuff like
yes. That's how it goes. Filling in, subbing, assisting, and the next thing you know,
yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
So as you were going through the process of Krav Maga, you obviously saw some growth and stuff like that. But did you ever think that you would be here Like owning your own?
No, I really didn't. I didn't. It's an interesting journey because I didn't even think I would necessarily be an instructor. It's so community driven that, usually if you're an instructor and you see a spark in a student, you'll approach them and say, are you interested in the instructor training program? And so that's how it was for me. My instructor at the time, he was building a school, but he wanted multiple locations.
Yeah.
And again, it was right in the triangle. I was traveling to Durham and Raleigh, for classes. And he was like, have you ever thought about, exploring teaching?
Right.
And I was like, no, but that sounds really cool. I would love to because it's the type of system that empowers your everyday person. Like, you don't have to necessarily be a competitor. It's not really designed to compete.
Right.
It's just really designed for you to feel stronger as you navigate life.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I'd love to help more people feel that feeling. And so when I started training to become an instructor, of course, it intensifies a lot because you're responsible for making sure you know how to execute the techniques, but also how to teach it in a way that's as accessible as possible to as many people as possible.
Right.
And so the instructor training program was the most rigorous thing I'd ever done in terms of physical activity, by far.
Interesting.
By far. Absolutely.
Like, what kind of, why was it so demanding?
Like, I did, like, dance has its own level of intensity. Especially with ballet and point, you have to be really precise, and it's very individual. I didn't have a lot of experience with contact. Basketball, I played for a while, but I mainly did things that were more individual performance. This was really my first time where it's like contact. You're hitting, you're striking, you're throwing, you're grappling, you're doing anything and all things to survive an attack. And so I just had never really done that before.
Gotcha.
And so it just pushed me into, and really, like every belt test, every fight, you push yourself past your conditioning.
Right.
And so just that experience alone was also just more rigorous than anything I had ever pursued. And so once you can, when you're a student and you take classes, you are preparing for a belt test. You're preparing for, the opportunity to show that you can execute the techniques in that level. We don't typically, at least at the schools where I've trained, we don't typically wear gis or belts, but we call it a level. So like, other systems may call it a white belt, we just call it level 1, so when you're trying to go from level to level, we do want to have an experience that's like a rite of passage. We can only go but so far in teaching someone and challenging someone to like fight for their lives, because there are no rules in the streets. We don't train to compete in front of a referee. We're literally training to survive possibly somebody who is willing to do whatever, to you, to acquire stuff from you or to hurt you or harm your loved ones. So we can't execute anything 100% because there'd be too many people going to the hospital. We try to get as close as we can so you have the confidence to say, okay, if someone, put me in a position where I had to fight, would this be effective? But of course, yes. But at the same time, we don't want people to have to fight. We want people to be vigilant, and we want people to stand taller and just be more, again, situational awareness. Like so many people it's only human nature. We're so busy, we're so slammed all the time that we're kind of tunnel vision in our day-to-day lives. And we just try to help people slow down and say, we're not paranoid, but at least let's be aware. Let's just, check a couple boxes to make sure that we're in tune in the moment. And if something were to happen, I have the confidence that I've done everything I could to give myself the skills to protect myself or my loved ones if I have to. But I hope to never have to use these skills. And that's the message that we really try to instill in everyone who trains with us. So just I felt very honored to be able to pursue that, but there's a huge responsibility. And so the training that we do to get certified to teach Krav, it's designed to be very intense because that's a big responsibility that we have. We don't want people to get injured because we want to make sure you're at your best when you leave the studio. We're training you to be at your best when you're going to your car, you're traveling, or you're doing the day-to-day. But we again want you to feel tough. So we have to push you to train hard enough to get stronger, to get better. And you may only have an hour or two a week to do so.
Yeah.
You know, so
Yeah.
we understand people have families and people have lives.
Right.
So those of us who are instructors, we take more time to challenge our bodies, to challenge the techniques, to go as far as we can and say, okay, if somebody, you know, just to get more, you know, into the nitty gritty, if someone's trying to choke you, that you could get out of that choke.
Yeah.
If you've already been put in a position where you're getting choked. Like obviously we don't want to end up in that position. You're
Right.
not going to sit back and say, go ahead and choke me so I can try this out. But if you find yourself in a position where you're already under attack, you're already physically being harmed, how can you maintain the wherewithal and have instinctive movements come out of you to give yourself a chance to get out of that situation.
Right.
We're not trying to bully. We don't encourage people to bully, but it's like if you're already there, what options do you have?
Yep.
And you
I like
have
that.
to assume that that person has done this because they think they put you in a position of disadvantage.
Right.
They're not trying to catch you when you're fresh, you know,
Right.
when you had, you know, your gear on and the comfort of some shin guards and gloves and headgear and a mouthpiece. No, you might have if you're a working woman, you might have heels on and a pencil skirt. You know, those types of things we think about, and we think about that in our training. And it's like, what options do I have if I need to create an improvised weapon or something like that? So
Do you have
it's
people
a huge
like
responsibility.
do you have people like wear like casual wear like outside?
Yeah,
street wear and stuff
we
like
have
that?
workshops. The first school where I trained, we would do seminars and workshops on site, and we continue to do that. Where you know, we as a society we deal with school shootings. We deal with you know, people who've opened fire at your place of business, and so we simulate those things. So we actually have done workshops where we were in our business casual. We were actually on site in the office building because several people hire us to do those things with their companies or at schools. They used to do that more with schools, not quite as much anymore. But we literally trained in the trenches and at movie theater shortly after there was the mass shooting in the movie theater. So we actually went on site whenever those things hit the media. We try to target and say, okay, what can we do in that scenario? We empower people with. That's what Krav Maga is all about. It was literally created for people who were living in violence.
Yeah.
And so, I remember one in particular where our instructors, they came in with simulated ARs and AKs and came in, you know, simulating a mass shooting.
Damn.
And one thing I learned is whether I have on heels, wedges, sneakers, I'm going to fight. And that was a wonderful thing to experience because I didn't care at that point if I had a pencil skirt on and a blouse or some heels. We're tussling. And I think it's really important for people to know what they're capable of. And sometimes you don't have a choice. The first time I talked about a gun disarm, it's like, why would you ever go after a gun? It's like, sometimes you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
If someone shot 3 people ahead of you and you're next, that's the only time you should ever think about disarming, and that's what we train for.
Right.
The violence has already ensued, and you have no other choice. And so we put ourselves in those situations and we simulated those things, not just to practice, but to kind of see, because you still feel the fears. We would barricade, we would get under things, we would hear the sounds, and we simulated with the voice, because most of us in our training have studied those scenarios. We've either lived it or we've studied it intensely, and we were trained by people who either served in the military armed forces or just survivors of those situations. So we get firsthand on what happens.
Yeah. Did you ever get like people who just completely freak out?
Oh yeah.
About that kind of thing?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I can imagine that.
Yeah. I mean, it can definitely trigger some things, but that's what we're there for. There's also the mental health side, and we study that too. That's why becoming an instructor is not for the faint of heart. I mean, we go there, we have those tough conversations, and we talk about, as instructors, that responsibility of how to help someone go through that and cope with that moment. I train one of my favorite students. I've trained her privately for years. She was a survivor of attack in her home, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, on the phone, a normal day, and 2 guys ran up in there, hog-tied her, beat her, and stabbed her, and all kinds of things.
Damn.
In the middle of the day. And she was homebound for years, but she decided that she was not going to be a victim. She looked up Krav Maga, she looked up the instructors, and we worked with her from not being able to really feel comfortable with someone touching her to now she's like an advanced level Kravist. She wouldn't drive, she wouldn't leave her home, and now she can drive to class and no problem. So we've seen how it's helped, you know, empower people. And we've been there when they've had those episodes and those moments where people have PTSD and they black out, but we're there to help them get through that and to face those. And because most of us have ourselves at some point.
Yeah, and I've taught self-defense as well. It can be difficult when it's like, I had this one student where she was raped 3 times.
Wow.
You know, and like, you know, like you said, touching her is like, ooh. You know? But like, you know, after teaching her a few things and reminding her, don't think about what happened, but think about what you would do now.
Right. Absolutely.
And that kind of helped her get out of her own head and stuff like that.
Absolutely. So, absolutely.
Yeah. Things like that it's a tough situation, but it also needs to be talked about.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
In order to kind of help them through it.
Absolutely.
Stuff like that.
Absolutely. Healing is a very active process. It's not passive. You know, I'm thankful that, you know, modern technology, we have tools and things that can help us cope, but there's nothing like actively facing your traumas and working through it actively. Right. That's one thing I've learned from my experience and my clients is not to, you can be in the most intense time of your life dealing with trauma and take one step at a time to get through it actively. Yeah. And that is so critically important. And also to use your village. You'd be surprised the village you have when you go through trauma. And I found a village in Krav Maga. You know, when I've had those, you know, traumatic experiences. And what we found is that's like a common thread for most of us. You get that question a lot, like, why the heck would you choose something like Krav Maga? Because it's just like MMA. The people have this idea like it's just a bunch of like muscle guys who just get in there and just tussle all day. But it's like it's people from all walks of life. Your average Joe to somebody who may have served in the military, somebody who's been through some trauma, somebody who hasn't. You just never know. Right. And we've had fathers and mothers who are there training because they're trying to help their children get through stuff and all kinds of different stories. But yeah, that's the one thing that we know we have in common is that we've all been through some stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know you said Krav Maga is like a thing that you found on Groupon and you fell in love with it and stuff like that. Was there another reason why you chose Krav Maga? Or to stick with it? Yeah. I definitely, it's what I've stuck with the longest because I think for that reason, you know, I did kind of skim through what it was like to travel, and for the most part I had very positive experiences, but definitely as a young woman, I was in situations where I definitely felt unsafe. Not just unsafe because it's not like the cliche in a movie where you just happen to be in some dark alley and somebody comes out of the shadows. Right. You know, there were men who took advantage of the fact that I was young and naive and, you know, traveling by myself, even though I was with an organized group, who certainly let me know that I was pretty close to, you know, assault. And had I not, you know, had at least enough wherewithal to get myself out of those situations right away, it would have been a different story. Had I not had a group of people that I could call and say, I got to get back to base, or because I would explore. I would go off on my own and I would, you know, hang out with people who were native and local. But there was definitely an instance where I ended up, you know, with one of our guides, and you know, I was invited to his home, and you don't, it's pretty unassuming. He had a family and everything like that, and was professional, and I didn't think anything of it. But yeah, next thing I know, it was just like, the tone had changed, and I was pretty terrified because I realized I'm in a foreign country. I don't have family close enough to come get me, and you know, luckily I was just able to recognize soon enough before I was completely alone and isolated. But it was pretty dicey, and that was just, there were a few instances like that when I traveled that I kind of had a flashback to when it was time for me to train Krav Maga. And when I discovered Krav, I mean, I was professionally and personally going through a pretty traumatic experience because professionally I was in a program that was under national scrutiny.
And the student athletes I was working with were going through deep trauma as a result of it. What we were going through, when you do your job and you have the public that makes assumptions about how you do your job and they don't necessarily know the truth about what you're doing, it's traumatic to see your story being told by people who have no idea what you go through, what you do. And that's what we experienced, and it was rough, and we were
like
interrogated.
you personally, or as well?
Yeah.
Not just athletes?
Yeah, myself, exactly. I mean, we were picked apart, our emails, every single email that I drafted over the course of about 8 years, I had to answer for in hours and hours of interrogation in a situation that we largely had like nothing to do with.
Damn.
So it was very difficult. It was very traumatic, and to the point where
exhausting.
Yeah, and exhausting. And then we were the professionals who had to be there for our students, and they were going through the trauma of losing their careers. Their kids that we worked with to this day, they haven't recovered.
Oh wow.
I had kids who were I had on 3 occasions. I'm sitting with a student athlete who's literally going into psychosis. Before my very eyes.
Wow.
Because of the emotional and mental trauma.
What goes through your mind when that happens?
Oh my gosh, how am I gonna help this person get through this moment?
Do you feel like
and
kind of
also,
like you don't know where to go?
Absolutely. There was a situation where, and this would happen, you have a kid whose life is focused on a sport. And the hopes of their family members and community are hanging on their success in that sport.
Yeah.
They're probably in the newspapers for years in their hometowns, and they come to a university where they might feel like a fish out of water, but they still have to perform. And next thing you know, they might not be able to do so, and then their scholarship can be taken away. And who do they go to? They tend to go to whoever will sit and talk to them, which tended to be the academic support staff.
Yeah.
And so I'm sitting with a student athlete, a 19-year-old, a 20-year-old who does not know what he's going to do next. And I had in working with football, I had a student athlete who was 6'5", 365 pounds as a 18-year-old.
Wow.
And so when you have a kid like that going into a psychotic episode and you're by yourself in an office and you don't have anybody you can call for security, it's a tough situation, and it was terrifying.
Was it like he started getting like physically like?
Yes.
Throwing stuff and all that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just redlining. Much.
Yep, exactly. Gotcha. Just spiraling. And I knew that the real person was in there somewhere, but it was being buried by a genuine mental episode.
Yeah. That's very hard to come out of.
Very hard to come out of.
At the moment.
Absolutely. And so you just learn how to I didn't have any training for it at the time, but because I've worked with so many people from so many backgrounds and traveled, and I've been in those kind of situations before. The hair stood up on the back of my neck and say, okay, the only way I can balance this is to remain calm. And luckily I had a phone number of parents who I could call, and also we do have some folks on staff who are in charge of at least being a liaison in mental health crises.
Yeah.
And so I was able to make a few phone calls to make sure but he was institutionalized within a couple hours.
Oh, damn.
Is
that bad, huh?
Yeah, it was that bad. It was that bad.
Do you think that he, I don't want to say deserved, but is it a good idea? Was it a good idea for him to go that route of mental institution? Or?
Yes, just because physically he was just too dangerous, unfortunately.
Okay. Gotcha.
Like you said, if you have someone who's that big and who is losing self-control, I don't think the staff had any other choice. Now, the circumstances that led to that could be discussed further, but everybody has a job to do, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And even nowadays there's the NIL and people are getting paid, students are getting paid and they're able to be compensated a little bit more for the sacrifice they're making. Which is a controversial topic in and of itself. But at the time when you're an undergraduate and you have very limited resources, but you're stretched so thin as a student and an athlete with that amount of pressure, it's just a powder keg,
Wow.
It's just.
I feel like you got
really sad.
a good insight on to like what athletes go through, I guess.
Oh yeah, I spent enough time to see a lot and to experience a lot, and I have a deep empathy for what they all went through. And because it was such a public incident, it was It was very, I mean, people lost their lives, and even some of those students aren't here to this day because of the trauma that they experienced and the loss of their careers.
Can you say what the problem was?
Yeah, so it was.
I mean, it's public.
Yeah, it's public. I mean, anybody can look it up, but we were part of basically an NCAA investigation on illegal benefits. There were some student athletes who, you know, it was kind of the dawn of social media. There was some tweets sent, and it sparked an investigation to say, hey, I don't know if this student athlete could afford to go to this party and travel and do this and do that. Because at that time, it was completely illegal to fund those things, for anyone to give them money to do any of that.
Okay, gotcha.
So they're in the spotlight, heavily recruited. You know, it was there was the potential of being one of the strongest football programs in the country during that time. And there was a probe into whether or not they were receiving illegal benefits, which triggered a probe into the academic support they were receiving.
Oh, wow.
So there was a tutor in question who worked for us, and she had long been fired, but the damage had been done. She had, unbeknownst to us, had gotten involved with you know, one of the student athletes, and so then they started to dig deeper and deeper into what type of academic support they were getting. So there was a lot of controversy at the time because your job is to make sure that they have tutors and to make sure that they support that they need to check boxes to remain eligible.
Yeah, yeah.
And eligibility is critical because if you're not eligible, you don't maintain your scholarship and you can't pursue your dream. And you know, it's like a 1 in a million chance that they'll go pro, but at that time we had so many powerful athletes who could pursue NFL careers that it just sparked, you know, an investigation. And many big programs have been under investigation, but it was just particularly salacious because it was UNC, the oldest public institution in the country. And to have something like that happen at UNC was such a big what to do. Yeah. And for us, we felt like small fish in a big pond. It's like we literally are here just to make sure that they know when to register for classes, how to navigate just trying to do our job. And for us for people who didn't understand what that took, having a tutor and what happens in that tutor session and having it documented wasn't enough. Right. As a matter of fact, it caused scrutiny. It's like, well, do other students have the opportunity to do that? Do other students have someone helping them find classes to meet these requirements? It's like everybody can meet with an advisor, of course, but not everybody's scholarship relies on a sport that requires them to spend a certain amount of hours during the day that you cannot touch. You can't just say, hey, coach, I can't go to practice at 3 o'clock because I want to take this course towards my major. Yeah. You have to find a class that fits outside of it. Right. You know what I'm saying? So even though, yes, academics are incredibly important, your scholarship is necessary for you to stay enrolled. Right. And so you have to have someone help you navigate the curriculum. And so what sparked the controversy is there were professors that would say, hey, they can write a paper instead of attending class, and that just created a whole firestorm. It's like, okay, who was monitoring them doing these papers and blah, 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 blah. So it just led to, exactly. So there was a lot of controversy on were they getting special treatment. And at the end of the day, what happens if an institution feels like there's a lack of control? They just start firing people. You know what I'm saying? Like, we'll fire these people. Does this make it go away? Okay, we'll fire. Does this make it? So anyway, there was they hired an attorney to interrogate a lot of us for hours and hours and hours and hours a day to try to figure out, you know, who was the easiest person to get rid of. And there were a lot of casualties, a lot of careers were ruined, and both for the professionals and the students. Right. And, you know, coaches' careers were unfortunately ruined. Yeah. And, you know, over a decade later, some of those people had permanent damage. We lost some beloved coaches. One particular that I was close to who had a heart attack and passed away, you know, within the last few years. And it's just devastating to see what happened to people after that. Yeah, absolutely. So that was one of the
you pulled things. Through.
Yeah. So again, when I say I was looking for an outlet, that's why. Yeah. And when you're at the time, I was in my mid-20s and so many people had been fired. There was a few sessions where I was the only academic counselor for the entire football program, swimming and diving. So 115 football players, 73 swimmers and divers, and another 15 women's basketball players. Oh. And just in charge of making sure that they maintain academic progress and remain eligible. And I will say I'm proud they all remained eligible. I'm very
Nice.
proud of that. And of course, I had help. There were advisors. Okay, there are people I could go to make sure all the, ducks were in a row. But it was still very, very difficult.
Yeah, I can tell why you needed that outlet.
Yeah, so punching and kicking was,
Yeah.
it felt pretty good at
Yeah,
that point.
I bet. So let's get back into that Krav Maga.
yeah.
So you started doing Krav Maga, and then you started teaching. Big difference between teaching and just being a student, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
So as a teacher, what's the common thing that you see in Krav Maga, like for people who just come in?
People are looking for something to help them with their confidence.
Yeah.
Men, women, old, young, no matter what the background, some people just need a boost. People and people are afraid, especially in this day and age, we are constantly bombarded about what we should be afraid of. You can't watch a commercial. You can't do anything without being reminded. You should be afraid of this. You should be concerned about that.
Don't eat this. Don't eat that.
Right, exactly. It could be anything,
And
unfortunately, you see the news and there's violence and there's this and there's that. And I tell people, unfortunately, violence is a part of the human condition. We can't get rid of it. It's something we have to face and deal with.
Right.
And so a lot of people come to us because they're like, I don't know what I would do. I realized I was in a compromised situation. I froze. And I want to be able to take care of my family.
Yeah.
A lot, fathers come in and say, I'm responsible for people, and I realize I don't know what to do.
Yeah. That's why I did my MMA. It's
I believe it.
It's one of those things where, yes, I do want to protect the family that I have and stuff like that, but it goes deeper to myself as far as like, do I have the capacity to do something?
Absolutely,
And it's
absolutely.
Like, it's almost like how much of a man are you?
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
absolutely, absolutely.
So.
And everybody has their reason. For women, I don't want to just deal with stereotypes, but there are a lot of women who've been assaulted and they're trying to figure out how to heal. And it's so funny. I dove in head first and I was training like crazy and you get that question a lot, especially when you're a woman who trains. It's like, why in the heck do you do this? Because we don't deal with weight classes. We don't deal with only women can train with women and men with. Your partner is whoever came to class that day.
Yeah.
And when it comes to going, I've trained in Israel. I've trained in Los Angeles at headquarters. I've trained all over the country. I've trained in different countries. And when I showed up, I was training with whoever else was there. And so when I got certified in Israel, there were 25 other dudes and me. And I'm like, cool with that. When you sit in front of 115 football players and you have to fuss at them about study hall, that wasn't a big deal to me.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like I have to sit here and deal with, not have to, I choose to, because I want to empower myself. Yes, go ahead and try to choke me out to see if I can get out of this situation. Go ahead and pin me down. Go ahead and punch me and see what I can take. Like, we're not trying to injure the crap out of each other, but you do me a disservice if you don't push me and challenge me.
Yeah.
And that's why we train.
Yeah.
And I've had so many guys, especially my first instructor, was like, why the heck, what brought you to this? And again, most of us are there because we went through something.
Yeah.
There was a time where besides just when I traveled overseas as an undergrad and being young and kind of carefree and looking back and maybe even kind of stupid, it's like I've been in those situations where, I found myself, incapacitated and at the mercy of, men I didn't know. And, unfortunately have to live with the repercussions of that. And unfortunately, things didn't go how I would have liked. I learned from that situation. I wish I didn't put myself in that situation. I was able to kind of put it in a little box and file it away up until I started training. And then it started to come back up and to say, okay, I have to face what I went through.
That muscle memory kicks in.
Yeah, and it's just like, had I had a little bit more vigilance, a little bit more self-awareness, a little bit more situational awareness, had I been wise enough to see the signs, the predatory signs.
Yeah.
And when I do women's self-defense seminars, I'm like, 9 times out of 10, it's somebody you know, somebody you're familiar with, somebody you may have crossed paths with. In my situation, it was somebody I was familiar with, or guys who I was familiar with. I didn't know them.
Right.
But we were in social circles where I thought, oh, there's no way.
Right.
There's no way they take advantage of me like that. And next thing you know, boom.
Yeah.
It's like, how did I end up here? How did I end up, you know, having to deal with assault? And so it's like, it's not just, again, like maybe just in a movie where it's like somebody's lurking in the shadows. Sometimes it's just someone who has gotten a little bit closer and a little bit closer and a little bit closer.
And then all of a sudden.
And then all of a sudden, boom.
Yeah.
And I've was trained in a seminar where that instructor at the time was describing a family friend's daughter who, you know, her roommate had a boyfriend, very unassuming. Her roommate wasn't there one day. He came in like, oh, I'm just looking for my girlfriend, busted in the door, and boom, was dealing with sexual assault right out the gate, and had to fight back. She took one class, and remembered one thing about an elbow to the throat and was able to collapse his trachea, and she survived the situation.
Wow.
And those stories empowered me to say, okay, not only am I doing this for myself and to empower myself, but if I can share this with one person who could take one thing away, that makes it all worth it.
Yeah.
I don't care if I go train and I end up with busted up, bruised, you know, some minor injuries that we might, you know, have to deal with here and there, but at least I know I have tested this to the fullest ability I possibly could without getting totally, you know, choked out, messed up, you know, but at least I can say, okay, I've tested this as much as I could. I've learned and trained with people who have survived using these techniques, and that's just invaluable to me.
Because when you don't know anything, it's like the most powerless thing that could happen to you.
Absolutely.
Someone taking over you.
Absolutely. And when you and people think, you know, it'll just happen, and it's like, no, the human instinct is to freeze. If you've never been in that situation, your instinct is going to be to just shut down.
Yeah.
And end up in a fetal position. And if some people think, okay, I'm willing to live with that, I'm not willing to live with that. I'm not willing to just shut down if there's something I can do about it.
Right.
And I've just known either too many people, been in situations myself, or known of too many stories where I wish so badly they might have had some kind of skill to help avoid that.
Yeah.
But we learn through our traumas if we, you know, survive them. And so
and
I'm
it's about
thankful.
like accepting the help.
Absolutely.
So, right?
Absolutely.
It's like a fork in the road. It's like that trauma could either ruin you or help you.
Absolutely. That's why you have to actively heal. And that's why I go back to that. It's like my client, if she didn't call and say, I'm going to try something like Krav Maga, I want an instructor, I don't care if, fine, let's start with just coming to my home. I'll let you in my home, and let's start with, I'm willing to expose myself to what happened to me. I'm willing to relive it. And she blacked out numerous times, but she's, every time she came back to it and said, let's try it again, let's do it again, let's do it again, because I'm not going to let myself remain incapacitated. I'm not going to, I want to be able to leave the house again. I want to get my freedom again.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let that day ruin the rest of my days.
Right.
And it's not a judgment to anybody who has a harder time or takes longer to try to get out of that. But we all are going to find some way to cope.
Yeah.
And there are destructive ways to cope, and there are ways that can be constructive. And so there's nothing like a punch and a kick and an elbow that make you feel empowered.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's a catharsis. You let that stuff out, you release it, and you face it, and you walk through that healing. It's, again, the more active you are in your healing, no matter what that trauma, I think the better.
Yeah, I think the active part I get, and then there's the other part of it being mental.
Absolutely,
Right?
absolutely.
It's
yeah,
mostly
yeah.
mental, right?
100%. Yeah, it's like I say, Molly, 99%. And that you say that 1% to get out there, you go get off your butt and do something about it. But yeah, it's the mental piece, and the physical helps balance that mental.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
so
it
yeah,
really does.
yeah.
Man, that's nice. So you trained in Israel.
Yeah, I've been a few times. Yeah.
Wow, okay. I didn't know you went that far to train. I mean, not train, but like to become a teacher or something.
Yes.
Is that what it was?
Yeah,
Okay.
I did most of my instructor training here in the States, but I had the opportunity to go to Israel, and Israel's the birthplace of Krav Maga.
Right.
And so, you know,
That's intense.
it was very intense, but it's like one of those things where the opportunity presented itself. I've always been a sure, why not type of person. So I jumped in, and my first instructor, we decided to go there and get certified to be recognized by the Wingate Institution, and so we trained there, and that was.
So hold on, go back
awesome.
a little bit.
Yeah,
so when we found out you were going there, was there some nerves kicking in and stuff like that?
This was 2015 at the time. Yes, definitely. And then when I arrived, it's definitely a sobering experience because you're like, oh, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah. Culture shock.
Yeah, big time. But
and the training aspect, like compared to the States, completely different.
Different, completely different. Not completely. The principles are the same.
Okay.
The principles,
like the foundation of it?
The foundations that we did a deeper dive into the history and the evolution of the system.
Okay.
But we also, one thing about the camp we attended, they exposed us to different people and different ways Krav Maga is used. Yeah. And depending on your role, there are certain things you can and cannot do. So we were trained by people who worked in, maximum security. Okay. You can't take a prisoner and just kick him in the groin. That's illegal. So, but we go to we want to hit vulnerable targets right away when you're talking about survival. Yeah. So and it translates. And if I'm instructing a teacher, it's like, okay, and especially these days, you might have a high school student bigger than you, even a middle school student bigger than you, more violent than you, who grabs you, attacks you. You still can't just chop him in the throat, kick him in the groin. There's certain things, or if you work as a nurse or a physician, or you have you work with people with mental health issues. There are limits to you still need to defend yourself and your well-being, but sometimes you can't just go for a groin strike. So we were learning from, again, it was their world was different, but similar perspectives and principles, if that makes sense. Gotcha. In terms of the rigor, because we were guests and we were overseas, I would say it was a different type of intensity. A little bit more of the mental side of it. Culturally, they're a little bit more like, I'm not worried about your feelings. I'm going to tell you exactly. I'm going to pick you apart as an instructor. We don't play when it comes to empowering people because we deal with violence and real violence. And we need to make sure that you know what you're talking about. And so they really challenged us mentally, pushed us physically, but definitely wanted to make sure that we didn't return to the States with injuries, if that makes sense. So things were very safe.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I felt safe and secure.
Yeah, and then when you came back, it's like, I feel like it's a whole new layer of yourself, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I definitely came back thinking like, wow, I can't believe I did that. And I thought it was pretty cool. Before I opened my own business, the first time I went with my instructor at the time. The second time was after I had already started a business, and the instructor who I trained came with me. So it was kind of cool to be full circle.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. So did all these teachings and all around the world and stuff like that.
Yes, all around the world.
But then you started your own studio.
Yes.
Talk to me about that, how that came about.
So, let's see, in 2018, there was trauma at the first school where I was teaching Krav Maga. Okay. We had an instructor who had some mental health challenges and led him to take some attempts on his own life. Oh, wow. Which he ultimately ended up doing. And so we, a lot of us who were brought together at that school, we really wanted to keep training. We wanted to create an environment that was healthier. And I felt terrible about the people who had really dedicated themselves to growing that school. Yeah. And so for different reasons, I didn't really have a plan B. I was all in with Krav Maga. I was kind of managing that studio as well for a while. And I said, a couple of other instructors, I was like, we could team up and, teach some classes in the community. I wasn't really thinking about a whole brick and mortar. But we found a place in Chapel Hill, which I was relieved to find because I live in Chapel Hill and I was kind of sick of commuting all over the place. I was teaching in Raleigh, teaching in Cary, teaching in Durham. Oh, that's a lot. Yeah, it was a lot. And so I was like, maybe we could create a community here in Chapel Hill. Let's give it a shot. I wasn't sure if it would work or not, but I knew I didn't want to give up Krav Maga, and I knew I didn't really have anything set up to transition to. So I was like, in the meantime, I might as well go for it with a couple of partners. And this was, we kind of established it at the end of 2018, really kicked things off in 2019. And then, of course, the pandemic hits. Right. So we were like, oh.
So talk to me about the beginnings of that. right? So like, was that kind of tough for you, or was it?
It was very tough.
Yeah?
It was very, very tough. I felt like I had left, one trauma at the university and went into kind of a traumatic situation at the Krav Maga school. And then we start the school and I'm like, this is going to be a healthier situation. And then boom, the pandemic hits, which is like the worst of it all.
Right.
But again, community is everything. And one of our biggest mottos is, tools are great. You need to train with tools. If you do decide to carry, work with firearms, knives, or whatever it is, training is even better, making sure that you understand those tools and you can use your hands if you need to, if you don't have those available.
Right.
But nothing beats community. And so it's amazing what you can get through when you team up and work together. So I still was a part of a federation that has schools throughout the East Coast, and we also have a sister school in Raleigh, and so Krav Maga Raleigh. So I started the coalition, and I was like, we have these relationships with other business owners, and the team I started with, we kind of went different ways because there were certain fears around what was going to happen. And then, dealing with injuries and dealing with other things, I said, well, I'll keep it going. I had a couple clients who were like, we really need this. So let's find a way to make it work.
Yeah.
And honestly, people were kind enough to just keep paying membership. We went virtual for a few months, but then we're like, look, we need community. We need to get through this together.
Yeah.
So we put some bags outside, spread them out. We started hitting bags and, we still kept things virtual so people could train in person and online.
It's kind of hard to train virtually with Krav Maga.
Very, right? Yeah, very hard. But we at least, kept people moving. We could still do some fitness classes, but we also could still just work the techniques dry.
Right.
It's like, throwing elbows, throwing punches, throwing kicks, you can kind of do them in the air. Or if you have loved ones at home who could hold pads, we were renting out pads so people could train at home.
Nice.
So we found a way, know, and then teaming up with other schools, it's like, okay, I'll take certain time slots and I'll teach because virtual teaching is a whole other ball game.
Yeah.
Way more difficult, way more exhausting. So we just worked together. We said, let's put a batch of classes, on Zoom, and we went from there. And once we started training in person, again, with some social distancing, and we followed the guidelines, and we knew of people who kept training and grappling and all kinds of stuff. And we just felt like, as long as we keep ourselves moving and healthy and getting some vitamin D, and, we felt like we were doing the best we could to follow the guidelines and keep people as safe as possible.
Right.
And then gradually, slowly, as things lifted and people were more comfortable making contact, that's what we did. And one of my managers and lead instructors, Steven, we decided we wanted to go ahead and pursue our black belts at that time. We're like, well, we don't have as much pressure of what's going on in the studio because we had to kind of trim things down for the virtual training and outdoor training, especially in the hot summer months and the cold winter days. Being outside, you don't train quite as long. But we decided, hey, let's go ahead and train for our black belts. We had been training together throughout the whole thing. Fortunately, we were staying healthy. And we ended up, traveling to Pennsylvania, and over the course of 2 days, about 8 hours a day of training, we were able to get our black belts, and it was a pretty cool experience.
Yeah, that's an achievement right there.
Yeah, it was a big deal. And one thing about Krav, it's similar. It's mixed martial arts. We're pulling things from different systems, and so when we had to demonstrate what we needed to show in proficiency in grappling, we were training with jiu-jitsu practitioners, and we were kicking and sparring with folks who train in Muay Thai, and we were doing throws and takedowns with judo instructors. So we were able to really test our skills in all of those different areas in the way we apply it in Krav Maga. So it was intense, but we trained really hard for it, and it really helped with the mental health piece, getting through that period. Because for all of us, it's like an abyss. It's such a weird time. 2020 to 2022 roughly. It's like
it's a blur.
It's a blur, right?
I can't remember if it happened before or after.
Exactly. There's the before and it doesn't seem like it was that long ago. And it's like, gosh, we're 4 years out of 2020. But it really helped us cope and heal. Right. And keep our minds focused on something and keep ourselves fit and it's not just about physical fitness, but you really need people. You really need connection. Right. And I remember the first time people felt comfortable giving hugs again. That was like the best thing ever.
The first hug I get in like a year.
Yes,
like
exactly. And honestly, we found that through the people we trained with, and so that was really an intense situation. But we grew from it, and we're still here. Amazingly,
Yeah. I
still
mean,
in business.
it seems like you guys are doing good things, and I really like it. And it seems, like you said, community based.
Yes.
Which is very
Yes.
nice.
Yes.
It becomes a family. In
Absolutely.
That way, right?
Absolutely. And we like that family feel. I didn't have quite as much of an affinity for competitive sports personally. I love watching it. I love basketball and football and all that, but I really love that we train and we just want to help each other get stronger. It's not quite as competitive. Of course, we spar and we grapple, but we really do it with the purpose of saying, okay, does this work against someone my size or bigger or smaller or more flexible or less flexible? We have, again, your partner is who shows up to class. So, and of course we make sure people are comfortable. We don't encourage anybody to train with someone who they might feel unmatched with or whatever.
Well, also, like, you have some students who don't know their own strength.
Absolutely.
And so you got to realize that as a teacher and stuff like that.
And that's part of the training that you have to go through. That's why instructor training is so intense, because we're responsible to make sure people feel challenged but are safe. And that's why we have levels. And that's why we try to differentiate. It's not just your typical martial art, because you have to maintain those classifications, weight, class and experience and belts, because you don't want people to get injured. Right. But with Krav, you may be in class with somebody who's been training 10 years. It might be your first day. You might have been training 10 years and you're with someone who is their first day. And so you just never know. And we're always being challenged. You're never an expert, because you can't possibly train with everybody in every situation,
Right.
But
there's always going to be somebody better than
There's
you.
always going to be somebody better. And even when we went to Israel, one of the highest ranking Kravists, he was like, do you think I still train basic punches and stance and movement? And I remember somebody was like, no, you do all this fancy stuff. He's like, are you out of your mind? Well, you got to always train the basics. He's like, I train the basics every day, even though he can do some crazy type disarms and things in multiple attacker situations, and because they do a lot of demonstration, of course, and so it's mind-blowing. Some people like to keep it simple, keep it brute force, strength-based, but we try to make sure that you can find leverage no matter what the disparity is between you and somebody who might inflict violence on you. So but yeah, we really try to study ways. We have a curriculum, we have a standard set of techniques, but not everybody has the same capacity and capability, and people come with injuries, people come with other challenges. I've been training a woman for years who's wheelchair bound, and she has MS, and she has the right to learn how to defend herself, and so we tailor things as people need, but at the same time, we also have, classes, group classes, where you are required to demonstrate the curriculum. And so we have our belt tests. They're meant to be intense for everybody who participates. And sometimes we have a whole family. We have a mother, father, and 3 of their kids who train together, every week. And it's fun to see the we laugh and say the family who trains together slays together. It slays together, stays together. And so we kind of have a play on that. But it's, again, we want it to be family friendly. Right. But we offer opportunities in workshops to deal with, we'll have a carjacking seminar. How do you deal with that situation? How do you deal with an active shooter situation? How do you deal with, teaching kids how to find their voice if they're in a compromised situation, and just to be able to vocalize. And we always say, it's up to the parent to instill what they want their child's values to be in terms of dealing with violence, but we certainly want to empower them with tools and awareness, and we still make it fun. But
bullies too,
absolutely,
so, like, people go through that.
Absolutely, most everybody probably does.
I like MMA and Krav Maga. It's kind of like similar. MMA is more competition based.
Absolutely.
And then Krav Maga is more survival based.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, it's a great way to describe it.
Yeah, I really like it, because people say, oh, what's martial arts do you like the best? I'm like, every single martial arts has pros and cons.
Exactly.
And it's about how you can take one thing from here, one thing from there.
Absolutely.
In order to defend yourself in a situation or something like that.
Absolutely. And it just depends on your goals. Like, there's some people who are like, I like to wrestle, I like to grapple, I like to figure out, I really want to be pushed in the most intense cardiovascular way every time I go and train, and like the structure of wearing gis and belts and having a chance to go to competitions, and so you're gonna lean more towards probably your jiu-jitsu, your MMA or something like that, and then we have an environment where you don't wear gis, you come in your regular clothes, and and we take bits and pieces and elements from many different systems,
Yeah.
but with the purpose of there is no referee and there are no rules.
Right.
But at the same time, we have to make sure that it's safe, and we have to make sure that if your partner has you by a couple hundred pounds, you might be a lot taller, might be a lot bigger, or what have you, that you make sure you don't injure each other.
Yeah.
But you still learn.
Yeah.
You still, both parties still have to get something out of it.
Right, right.
You know, so and we put you in those situations. Like I remember one of my trainings, I think this was in Israel, we were in, I never thought about it, we were in bathroom stalls. And it's like, imagine you're somewhere where you're coming out of the stall and you're attacked.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that type of environment?
Right.
You know, you have to really think about what your situation might be and how and what tools, again, you have available. You know, I go on and on about that.
Sure,
but that's a great way to describe it. You have some that are more competitive based. It just depends on where you are and what your goal is.
Right.
Do you want to just get in shape? Do you want to do something that is going to push you to compete, or do you want to do something that's going to, you know, have, you know, maybe bi-monthly challenges, belt tests, something that you can kind of do at your own time and at your own pace, something that you want to do with your family, or something that you don't want your family there. This is your thing. So everybody should, you know, think about what works for them.
I've been really wanting to kick somebody as hard as I could, because like the way I kick, it's like bombs going off.
I believe it.
And man, I'm just like thinking, damn, if that was a leg or a knee,
right?
Jeez,
right?
But, you know,
right.
I've never been in a street fight, which is another reason why I train in MMA.
Absolutely,
you know,
absolutely.
to protect myself, and especially when I first started off, I was a lot of turtling.
Yes.
Like when to stand up and stuff like that. So it's not until actually I took boxing 3 years later is when I got comfortable with my stand-up.
Absolutely.
And stuff like that.
Absolutely.
But, yeah, the turtling up is the big part for a lot of people.
Yeah. And it's cool to start with one system and say, okay, I realize this is, I always say, an opportunity for improvement. I'm like, not necessarily weakness, an opportunity for improvement.
There you go.
And so it's like, okay, I notice that this is my reaction when I'm fighting in this way. So let me take some boxing to improve how I strike. Let me take some Muay Thai to improve how I kick.
Yeah.
Let me take some Jiu-Jitsu so I can improve how I grapple. So that's what I love about starting with something like MMA or Krav, where you get exposure to different systems.
Yeah.
And then you can go into one and fine tune if it's your jam, or if it's something that you just want to really improve upon.
Absolutely.
So,
Well, I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for
It really
having
means a
me.
lot. I feel like I could talk to you for hours.
I know, right? Definitely, I appreciate it.
But you'll have to come back and
Absolutely,
we'll talk some more.
absolutely.
But
Thank you so much.
do you want to tell everybody where they could find you?
Yes. Oh, thank you. So the Coalition, we're in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Our website is thecoalitionnc, like NorthCarolina.com. And if you visit our website and leave an email, we'll follow up with information on how to become a member or how to learn more about our schedule of workshops, or if you want to take a sample class, definitely visit our website, thecoalitionnc.com.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate it.
That's it.
Thanks.